Hey, everybody. It is I, Van Allen Plexico, and we are back for another exciting episode, I think, of All of the Avengers. As you know, maybe by watching the first 25 issues and bonuses of this series, I, the creator of AvengersAssemble.net way back in 1995, and an Avengers fan since my first Avengers comic in 1977, Avengers 162, which I'm hoping to get to someday on this series. I am attempting to read every issue of Marvel's Avengers comics, and we started with Avengers #1 about 13 months ago, and we are all the way up to Avengers 26. And so I think today we're going to look at 26, 27, and 28. So this is going to be kind of an extended episode in terms of what we're going to cover, because I would like to go ahead and knock out a nice chunk of one big storyline. Now, obviously, the Avengers back in this era, which we're talking the mid 60s still, the storylines always continued. Very rarely did an issue just end and they weren't setting something up for the future. But in this case, I think these three issues kind of go together, as we'll see in these three issues. As we will see here, we get the return of Giant Man and the Wasp. We get the first appearance of the Collector. We get an appearance of Attuma, the Submariner's, I guess, main sort of antagonist. And we get the Beetle. So it's a really odd collection of characters that pop up in this trio of issues. But I like them all to some degree. I've always been a big fan of the Beetle. And of course, about a year after I started reading the Avengers, we got that amazing Collector story that more or less ended with Hawkeye fighting him solo, I believe in 174. So it's kind of neat to see a Collector story, a story featuring the Collector that Hawkeye is involved in, although very different from what Jim Shooter would do with him a few years later. All right, so let's go ahead and dig into Avengers number 26. And by the way, let me remind you, as always, that this series, which is on video, and I also am trying to post the audio from it to the White Rocket podcast. I have a giant podcast series I've done, the White Rocket podcast, that we've talked about all sorts of things over the years, and I'm putting these reviews there along with many other things. So just but if you want to support the show, go to www.avengersassemble.net and just click on the button to become a patron. We can certainly use the support to keep this show going, and it helped me to read all the Avengers and share them with you. All right. So here we go. Avengers 26. No, your eyes are not deceiving you. You're looking live at the wonderful Wasp. Don't dare miss the startling surprises inside. And we have a really interesting cover there with Attuma holding Jan in a glass container, and then the Cap's Kooky Quartet kind of surrounding them. All right, so let's get on into this one. I have a few things to talk about along the way. There's a lot of battles in this issue, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't make for great conversation, I have found, right? Stan would just kind of let the artists go to town on their action, and then he would come in and sort of script over it. But it's not the most entertaining thing in terms of conversation and digging deep into it. I'm still more fascinated with the relationships among Cap's Kooky Quartet. And I got to tell you, a running theme through these reviews ever since Hawkeye joined the team has been, why do they keep Hawkeye on the team? And I always say, I know that people love Hawkeye, and I get it, and I like Hawkeye later. I like Hawkeye in the 70s. I like him later when he's the head of the Thunderbolts, for example, which actually there's a reference that'll come up to that a bit later. But the way he just does nothing but whine and gripe and complain and argue with Captain America, I just have no patience for him at all. So, and he just does it so much, especially through issue 26. So this issue is called The Voice of the Wasp. And Cap has called the team together so that Wanda can ask what's wrong. Quicksilver can point out that he doesn't see anything wrong. And Hawkeye can insult him. Now, I have to note, we're still in the Stan Lee era with Don Heck doing the art. And I continue to be impressed with Don Heck. I mean, I'm as big a Jack Kirby fan probably as there is, right? We've established that. I love Jack Kirby's art. But there's no question in my mind that where Jack's art was on the Avengers in 1963, 64, Don Heck takes it a leap forward. I mean, he really does. I mean, just on a panel by panel basis, Jack could probably outdo him in a single like splash page, but the panel to panel artwork, as we're going to see on the next few pages, Don Heck was kicking butt. Now he's inked, we are told, by Frank Ray, but my understanding is that's actually Frank Giacoya. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Giacoya, that guy, right? And then Artie Simek lettering everything back then. And rather than giving the colorist a box, Stan just puts a funny little comment. You don't catch us breaking up a winning combo. Why not just put the colorist there instead of a little joke? All right, we are in March of 66 by now, which means this issue was probably written and created at the very end of 65. All right. So it turns out that Tony Stark had created some kind of a machine for them to send messages to each other, kind of encrypted. Well, that's how, I guess in 1965, 66, that was a really big deal with a microphone and cassette tape or whatever. But we get into some of this banter and then actual squabbling between Quicksilver and Hawkeye, which I just have no patience for. Captain America has to step in and make them stop. He makes them shake hands. And then Hawkeye is heading out on the town. And so Cap tells him here, the Avengers got along pretty well without you in the past. They can do it again if they have to. And instead of being, chastened by that, Hawkeye's like, bunk. You had Giant Man, Thor, and Iron Man backing you up before. Now you need all the help you can get, and you know it. So don't put me on, big man, or I may call your bluff one day. And Cap says, go on, get out. You'll learn about teamwork someday, but it's going to be the hard way. So what the heck, Hawkeye? Stop being such a jerk, All right, meanwhile, we catch up to Henry Pym and Jan on a ship, and apparently this carries over from Tales to Astonish number 78, which had just come out. And they apparently clashed with the Submariner and left, and they're there on the ship, and they need to get back to the shore, and so Jan shrinks down and flies off to go get help. And she has at one point to get normal sized and float for a little bit to rest. And when she does, she gets captured by Attuma, who doesn't know she's a superhero, but helpfully to this random woman he's captured swimming in the middle of the ocean. He explains his secret plan that he has a big machine that's going to flood the mainland. So thank you, Attuma, for bragging about your secret machine. Then Jan escapes and sends a message to the Avengers, who get the message. They try to contact Hawkeye, who's hanging out with all these women in a nightclub in costume, by the way. Hawkeye goes to a nightclub in costume as Hawkeye, and he talks about his communications ring, which this lady says it's like something out of James Bond. And then he drops it and apparently breaks it. And so they can't contact Hawkeye, so they go without him. Way to go, Hawkeye. You abandon the headquarters, and then you drop, lose, break, whatever your communications ring. Too bad it's not a Legionnaire's ring, because then he could fly. So the Avengers take off in whatever vehicle they're using at this time. They seem to have different vehicles all the time during this era. They hadn't gotten to the Quinjet era yet. So Attuma's big grapple claw grabs the Avengers' vehicle, which looks like something out of like the 40s or 50s. Interesting. Captain America attacks, and there's a battle. And Quicksilver and Wanda, and they all kind of get taken down. I wanted to say something, but let me pause for a second for this little, this commercial break. We finally come to an ad for something I actually had back in the day. The 100 toy soldiers for $1.25. I'm pretty sure by the time I had it, because they were still selling these things. Okay, this is early 66, so I probably had it in early 78, mid 78, 77, 78, somewhere in there. So they were still selling these things 10, 12, 15 years later, at least. And it was probably a lot more than $1.25 at that point. It was probably more like $3 or something. But I remember ordering this, and it even said packed in this Foot Locker toy storage box, and it contains all these different things. And I remember when it came, I can remember going to the mailbox with my grandmother, and she opened the mailbox, and there was this little box, and it was torn, and the box was colored to look like a Foot Locker. And I opened up the little cardboard box, which is already falling apart. Things were about to fall out of it from shipping. So number one, the Foot Locker, if you notice right up here in tiny little letters, which I didn't even notice at the time, it says pasteboard. So in other words, the box they're shipped in is this Foot Locker that you get that's supposed to be so cool. Okay, so what they do, they just print, they print the looks of a Foot Locker on the cardboard. That was it. It was gray or tan or something, just regular old cardboard, if I remember correctly. And then the soldiers inside, they weren't even like those cool plastic army men we used to call them, that you could go to the 5 and dime store and buy, like in a big plastic bag of soldiers to fight with. They were so cool. I mean, that was probably one of my main toys when I was a kid. Micronauts, Shogun Warriors, and Mego action figures, and a whole crap ton of army men, soldiers. I call them soldiers, but I guess people call those little toys army men. I don't know if they were all army. But when I opened up that box, they were flat. They weren't the same kind as you'd get at the store. They were like two-dimensional, like just little flat soldiers with little bases. I was so disappointed. I mean, it wasn't a gigantic financial outlay, although today they'd probably be like, it'd be like $12 or something for them. You get about 20 cents worth of plastic soldiers in a cardboard box. So that was quite the ripoff for those toy soldiers. I was very disappointed in everything about them. All right, so here comes Attuma, fights Quicksilver. Quicksilver thinks he gets him, but then he turns the tables, knocks Quicksilver out. Here come the other Avengers. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, so just when he's won, Attuma's men tell him, I keep thinking Attuna. He's like a tuna in the ocean. Attuma's men come up and they're like, our warriors think that you're not that impressive. That you were too cautious. He says, they accuse me of cowardice? Well, perhaps a better word would be caution. I love that his big, scary warrior guys are like, well, I wouldn't say they're calling you cowardly, Attuma, but they definitely think you're using a little too much, shall we say, caution with these surface dwellers. So Attuma's like, give them helmets. Let them fight me fair and square. I'm not going to let them think that. So Attuma's going to fight them in their air helmets, since they're under there. And it's funny too, the whole thing is presented as, and I think this is actually pretty smart, right? I didn't think of it at first, but this whole story, in Attuma's realm, I kept thinking, well, they would be underwater, right? They should be underwater, like they're swimming deep under the water. But instead, they keep talking in this story about how it's just really, really humid. It's like these scenes are all taking place in South Florida or something, or Washington, D.C. in the summer. And all I could figure is that if they were underwater, it would look different and their movements would be different, right? And they could drown a lot faster. So Stan and the artist, and I'm already blanking out. Go back for a second. Should go faster than this. I was further along than I thought. Sorry. Don Heck, of course. Duh. Just blanking out. There we go. So there we go. Right. So they couldn't show him in the water. That would cause all too many problems. So instead, it's in a really humid environment where nobody's super happy, right? Because don't you think underwater Attuma would be nearly invincible, kind of like Namor? But in a very humid space, he's not invincible. He has a good fight with these three Avengers battling around. And then the area's getting flooded. And meanwhile, while the Avengers are in this crisis about to drown, there actually is water coming in. Yeah, our master is victorious. Attuma fights equally well underwater. I would have said better underwater. But the humans have no chance. It's only fitting. Let the humans be disposed of quickly. We have far more urgent matters to attend to, such as the flooding of Earth's surface. Flooding the Earth's surface is an important matter to attend to, no doubt about it. All right, so basically in this issue, the Wasp was captured. She called the Avengers. Hawkeye didn't make it, but the other three did, and they get defeated by Attuma. And then on the last page, Hawkeye gets back to Avengers Mansion, realizes the Avengers are gone, sees there's a message for them that's encoded, and he can't remember the code. He can't remember the secret code to type in, which I believe is 1313, to retrieve the message. So he sits down in Tony Stark's subliminal recall inducer. I love the name that Stan gives these things, to help him remember. And even as Hawkeye is in this chair trying to remember stuff, a figure walks in that we are to understand is probably very menacing. And again, look at all the text. My gosh, really? Do you need? I mean, Stan really was trying to write a novel, it seems like, back in those days. I mean, I think you didn't need all that, but all right. So the one thing I will note, I like the Hulk sweatshirt where on the front, here comes the Incredible Hulk. On the back, there goes the Incredible Hulk. What I'm trying to figure out is he's got a rope in his hand when he's coming forward, and from the back, it looks like he's pulling a child's toy with little wheels on it, like a rabbit or something. I don't know what the deal was with that, but anyway, Hawkeye is trying to sell it to me by telling me how bad off I am without it. And I'm just like, Hawkeye, I don't like you in the comics. I sure don't want you trying to sell me a $3 sweat. It is funny, though. The whole sweatshirt's only $2.98. It's high quality. It's colorful. It's illustrated front and back. Comes in two sizes, monstrous and gargantuan. $2.98 for a sweatshirt that's got printing on the front and the back. That's pretty interesting. All right. The only thing I really had to say about the letters pages in all three of these issues is that I'm really impressed with how many women were writing in. Because remember, back then, this is like 1965 that these letters were probably written, and I would not have, say what you will about me, I'm just surprised. I wouldn't have thought back then so many women would have been reading these. And especially, they're all like Mrs. Like, here's one from Mrs. Linda Livingston. Says, being avid readers of your Marvel comics, my husband and I have run into a problem. Mainly, we can't always find every issue. So she's writing into the Avengers, not to say anything about the Avengers, but to say that she has a hard time tracking down the comics. We would like your subscription rates, especially for X-Men, Avengers, and Strange Tales. We can very rarely find these mags. Incidentally, we are both 22, and my husband is a college grad. One item on our monthly budget is Marvel Comics. And I like how she wraps it up with, one of the main reasons we both like your books is that they contain something hard to find these days. Good old-fashioned Americanism. Keep them coming, says Mrs. Linda Livingston in Pasadena, California. That's really interesting to me. There's just a lot to unpack there, but that's cool. They're both 22. The husband's a college graduate, and they have a line item in their monthly living budget just for Marvel Comics, but they can't always find them. So I'm sure they got subscriptions like I did when I was a kid. All right, let's get to Avengers 27 and continue it on. Here it comes. It looks like it. Oops. I'm using a different program this time to share the screen because it uses less. It doesn't have all the stuff around it that Acrobat did. But the downside is that I have to close it out and then reopen it every single time. There's probably a way to do it I haven't figured out yet. All right, here we go. Avengers 27. 4 Against the Flood Tide. I like that title. I like the cover a good bit. This is one of those fairly famous, I mean, it's not a famous issue. I barely remember reading it back in the day. I mean, I didn't read it back in the day, but in like, the 70s or 80s when I went back and kind of read the back issues or whatever. But that title and that cover, I have seen pop up here and there as just a really good Marvel story title. 4 Against the Flood Tide. And of course, the Flood Tide is what Attuma is planning to bombard the surface world with. All right, here we go. So there's Hawkeye. And again, this is Stan Lee, Don Heck, and Frank Giacoya, and Artie Simek. Again, I'm going to move right along because it's a lot of just fighting with Attuma. Remember, we also had a mystery villain, and in fact, Stan says, P.S. No, we didn't forget the mystery villain we left lurking in the shadows. We'll get to him before you know it. So Hawkeye is trying to use this chair to think of the code to get the message to find out what's going on with the other Avengers, when instead of all this, he could have just not lost his freaking ring, moron. Sorry, I'm just getting fed up with Hawkeye. He got it. It's 1313. Well, that's great. So now he goes to do it, and he gets attacked by, looky who it is. It's the Beetle. I love the Beetle. The Beetle is awesome. Love the Beetle. Here's the funny thing. Hawkeye fighting the Beetle. Now let me see. I've got his first. Okay, so I didn't mention Attuma's first appearance was Fantastic Four number 33, which was just a little bit over a year earlier, right? This issue came out in spring of 66. So about a year and a half earlier is when Attuma first appeared in Fantastic Four 33, which I haven't read that one in a while. I probably need to make a special episode for the patrons just for that. But I'm sure it involved Namor, because Namor was popping up in the Fantastic Four and the Avengers all the time during these years, and Attuma was his sort of nemesis. So the Beetle first appeared in Strange Tales 123 in May of 64. So he was just a couple of months older than Attuma. And there's one more character that's going to pop up here in a little bit, well, that we haven't seen before. Now, I wanted to mention there is a later history with the Beetle, and I believe it's Abner Jenkins, right? And Hawkeye. And that is the Beetle. Well, I actually have the issue. I bought it off the newsstand. We have a newsstand in Alabama back then, or ever. I mean, when I was growing up in Alabama. I bought it off the spinner rack in the grocery store. And that was an issue of Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, a really good run around 1981, 82 maybe, when I was really enjoying Peter Parker. And the Beetle got rid of this costume finally. So the Beetle had this green jumpsuit with a funky helmet with two eyes and the stretchy finger suction cups and the purple wings. I mean, it's really a goofy costume, but it's one of those great lame Marvel villain costumes of the 60s and 70s that I just dearly love, right? I mean, it's up there with the Stilt Man and Claw and the Ringer, and there was just so many of those back. The Shocker, I just love those guys. And the Beetle will get a much cooler Beetle costume around 1981, somewhere in there, in Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man. And then, of course, in the 90s, he becomes Mach 1, and later Mach 2, Mach 3, Mach 4, Mach 5, and I think Mach 7. I'm not sure who Mach 6 was, but it wasn't listed as one of him. And here's what's interesting. When he becomes Mach whatever, and that's M-A-C-H, like he's a fighter jet in armor. When he becomes Mach number, right, he was in the Thunderbolts. And for a while, the leader of the Thunderbolts was Hawkeye. So they're fighting here, although we later find out that the Beetle is under mind control, more or less. We'll find out how and why and by whom in just a little bit. But they're fighting here. Later, Hawkeye will be the team leader for the Beetle's team. So, interesting. So they fight, and Hawkeye does enough to trap him. And then he finds the information about where the Avengers are. But then the Beetle attacks him again, and they fight again, and Hawkeye like gasses him, ties him up, all kind of stuff, leaves him there. What's oh, that's Fantastic Four. Okay. 50? Yeah. Silver Surfer. Interesting. Okay. Meanwhile, back to the other three Avengers. If you recall, when we left them earlier, the whole place was flooding, and now the underwater warriors and Attuma are fighting Captain America, and they're wishing Hawkeye was there. It's like this is the first time that Captain America's wished Hawkeye was around in a while. I promise you that. So they're fighting. And looks like Quicksilver's fast even underwater. And underwater, he has a kind of a Human Torch look to him to show that he's fast. Attuma fights Wanda, fights Quicksilver. Oh, yeah. And meanwhile, the giant waves from the flood tide machine are starting to hit the United States and other places. And within minutes, every program is preempted from the air. Only news bulletins are broadcast over radio and TV. And I love this. This is Chet Brinkley on the scene at Cape Hatteras. And at the end of his little report, he says, he says, panic is mounting. Fanatics call it the end of the world. Or are they fanatics? Question mark, question mark. And then he says, good night, David. And if you're wondering what that's all about, I'm thinking this is supposed to be an amalgam of Chet Huntley and David Brinkley on, I think, NBC News back then. And Chet would end the show by saying, good night, David. So I'm not sure if he's saying good. He must be saying good night to David Huntley. Since he's Chet Brinkley, they just reverse the names there. Oh, that was interesting. Okay. So, more fighting underwater. Yeah. Attuma ejects Quicksilver out in the ocean, where he's rescued by Hawkeye, and they go down looking for Attuma. They fight these other submarines, and they're in a Fantastic Four built one, because Quicksilver says Tony Stark is indeed a genius. And Hawkeye points out Tony Stark didn't build this one. I got it from the FF. Reed Richards ain't exactly a slouch either. They run into a giant octopus who actually captures the enemy and not them. And so they continue on toward Attuma's headquarters, where Attuma has repaired his vessel and put more oxygen in, so that he's not going to just let the Avengers drown. He wants to defeat them. And Captain America plays on his vanity. He says, basically, he calls him a phony and a bluff. And Attuma's like, I'll show you, phony and a bluff. And meanwhile, Wanda's being all brave. Cap says, don't despair. He's whispering, don't despair, Wanda. Stay close to me and follow my lead. And Wanda says, I shall never despair, Steve, while an Avenger lives. They've played on that for a while now, the idea of Wanda kind of having a romantic thing for Captain America, which, honestly, Quicksilver should have really been encouraging if he knew then what he knows later, right? Because obviously, eventually, Wanda falls in love with the Vision. And Quicksilver's hypocrisy, always, that was such a brilliant idea to bring out the hypocrisy of Quicksilver that, he's all about, you must respect mutants. Just because we're different from humans, we deserve your respect. And then Wanda falls in love with somebody who is neither a human nor a mutant. And Quicksilver's like, get away from my sister, So he didn't have a lot of respect there. But if he would have probably been a lot happier for her to end up with Captain America than with the Vision. But back then, he was just still in that weird stage of stay away from my sister. Now, I know that the Ultimates later plays on a kind of an incestual thing there with the two of them. And I get it. I mean, it comes across kind of weird at times, but I always felt it was pretty innocent. It's just Quicksilver thought nobody was good enough for his sister because he thought that his sister was so great. And that's cool. I understand that. So again, more fighting. Hawkeye's there. They fight. And they fight some more. It just kind of goes on forever. That's why this is the main reason why I was cramming 3 issues into this episode, is because there's just a whole lot of fighting that's really kind of pointless, except for the sake of them fighting with each other. So Quicksilver and Hawkeye are pinned down over here. Captain America attacks. Again, I mean, cool, They get in this war machine. They fly it out. It's funny because the thing that struck me here, they shoot some kind of a ray out of it. And Attuma realizes even he is not vulnerable, is not invulnerable, that he too is vulnerable to this weapon. So he says, I too must flee, but my plan goes on. Each passing moment brings the surface world closer to doom. So Hawkeye and Quicksilver jump on this armored tank vehicle thing. They find Captain America has already joined the Scarlet Witch there. And it's just a whole crap ton of dialogue here. And they're talking about rescuing the Wasp and everything. And then Wanda helpfully points out, wait, I almost forgot the most important thing. What about the floods which Attuma was causing? What good does it do for us to win our battle if the human race is losing theirs? So Wanda's like, it's really cool that we can go and rescue Wanda, but what about the billions of people about to drown in the flood attack by Attuma? Good thing that you remembered that, Wanda. Hey, Cap, isn't it kind of your job to remember stuff like that? It's a good thing you had Wanda there. But Cap has a whole different philosophy about it as they take off. Cap says, don't worry about the human race, Wanda. It's a lot more rugged than its enemies suspect. And so they're still squabbling. Oh my gosh. There's Hawkeye and everybody, they're still squabbling. And then this is just so good. I think this is my favorite moment in all 3 of these issues. Attuma in his control room looks out the window and he sees the Avengers escaping in the vehicle. And Attuma says, they're escaping. And there's an asterisk. And the asterisk leads to a footnote. And the footnote actually says, another bit of inspired dialogue by Sleepy Stan. So Stan wrote this dialogue, they're escaping, and then wrote a caption about his own dialogue making fun of it. I don't know what to do with that. I just don't. All right, so Attuma's going to crank up the pressure of his flood tide machine, make it even worse. But instead, something is wrong. The control lever is not responding. It reverses its function. The increased pressure is coming onto my own ship. It's sabotage. Someone has tampered with the control. It can only mean boom. So Attuma's machine blows up, allegedly taking Attuma with it. But of course, it doesn't, because we'll see him many more times in the future. And by the way, I think, now that I think about it, you know, it really is remarkable how Jim Shooter's run in the late 70s calls back to a lot of this stuff, because 174, Avengers 174 had Hawkeye against the Collector, which we're about to see in the next issue. It's not a spoiler, because look right here, meet the Collector, okay, on the last page. But I think a couple of issues before that, maybe 172, was Hawkeye and Attuma. It was the big return of Hawkeye, and it was Attuma that showed up. Now, at that point, I didn't have any idea who Attuma was. But I think it's kind of cool that in the middle of the whole Korvac saga, Shooter brought back Hawkeye, Attuma, and the Collector, which is what we see in this storyline here. So that's pretty cool. I give Shooter credit. All right, so the Avengers get back to Avengers Mansion, and they're looking for the prisoner that was tied up, and he's missing, and the alarm's going off. And Captain America is, don't just stand there, man. Tell us, who is this message from? What does it say? And Hawkeye is still trying to figure out who the Beetle was. And the Scarlet Witch says, my intuition tells me the Avengers are facing a new crisis. The message concerns the Wasp. Bum, bum, bum. So next issue, more on the Wasp and the Beetle. Sounds like a bug collection. Meet the Collector and the return of Giant Man. Enough said. All right, let's see. There's that shirt again. So again, the letters page, nothing specifically noteworthy. There's another important woman there from Oberlin College, Vicki Randall. That's pretty cool. And I may be thinking about, yeah, and then we'll run into another one on the next issue. So, oh yeah, but there's one interesting letter here. The very first one from Paul Shind of Vandalia, Ohio, says, Dear Stan and Don, here is the explanation to anybody that asks why Power Man didn't die after a week like Wonder Man did. So this is a calling back to several issues earlier that we've reviewed recently, where the Enchantress and the Masters of Evil grant similar Wonder Man type power to Eric Jostin, Power Man, who, by the way, is another Thunderbolt later on. So you have the Beetle and Power Man, although in the Thunderbolts, they are Mach 1 and Atlas. And so Paul says, after Eric Jostin was changed into Wonder Man, the Enchantress cast a spell on him to let him live, even though he was bombarded by those concentrated ionic rays. Enough said. There you go. Good an explanation as you're likely to get. All right. And that's going to take us to the last of our 3 issues today, Avengers 28. And once again, I have to go through the whole process again. There we go. All right. Back at last, Giant Man, except he's not going to be called Giant Man anymore. He's not going to wear red and blue anymore. He's going to be in yellow and blue. And it says, Among Us Walks a Goliath. And that's another one of those great covers, right? I mean, that's another one of those covers that I've seen a million times in places. And I think it made sense to put some yellow in his costume, because you have Captain America's red and blue. Obviously, the Scarlet Witch is red. Hawkeye's purple. But you've kind of got various colors represented now. You've got the yellow with Goliath, the red, white, and blue with Cap, the purple with Hawkeye, the red and pink with Wanda, and then the green and white with Quicksilver. So Although I got to admit, I never understood why Quicksilver wears green. I think it's just to make him stand out because nobody else wore green, but it's a weird choice. All right, so here we go. The last issue of this trio. And now we're up to May of 66. Among Us walks a Goliath, and the Avengers are back in their headquarters after defeating Attuma, and they hear an alarm going off. It's from a scientist named Henry Pym. He wants us to help him find the Wasp. Hawkeye says Quicksilver. Hawkeye says, "Who's Pym? What's his connection with her? Is she in danger? We'd better learn more," says Captain America. "I'll take the mic, Pietro." So I didn't know that the Avengers didn't know the Pyms. Well, Henry Pym and Janet Van Dyne. I didn't know they didn't know who they were yet. I had always assumed that the Pyms, Hank and Jan, were known. They've never made much of a secret of their identity, but apparently this is the issue. Avengers 28 is the issue where the Wasp and Henry Pym reveal their identities for the first time to the Avengers, at least to these Avengers. Two of whom will be around almost all the time going forward, Captain America and Scarlet Witch, and two of whom kind of pop in and out going forward, Hawkeye and Quicksilver. Again, Stan Lee, Don Heck, Frank Giacoya going by Frankie Ray, and good old Artie Simek. This time they didn't add another box with some stupid joke. They just don't credit the colorist in general. All right, so Janet escaped from Attuma and has been missing. And so Pym, still out on his ship, says, send someone to pick me up and bring me to Avengers headquarters immediately. It won't take long in our rocket jet air car. And I guess Cap is like, our rocket jet air car. And Hank says, of course, have you so soon forgotten the voice of Giant Man? And he says, I had to reveal my true identity. Secrecy means nothing now, not when Jan may be in danger. Only a summons from Giant Man will bring them there in time. Bring them here in time. So Cap tells Hawkeye to go get Pym. And of course, Hawkeye objects and has insults, and they trade some lines. And then Hawkeye agrees to go, but he says, anyone ever tell you how your eyes sparkle when you're angry? You know, Hawkeye, don't make me, if you, my listeners and viewers out there, are tired of me complaining about Hawkeye, don't blame me, blame freaking Hawkeye, okay? Or Stan. Because, dang, Captain America has the patience of a saint, because I would have either fired Hawkeye or just killed him. Be like, the first time Ultron attacks, I'd be like, Ultron, don't shoot the guy in purple with the bow, and then throw him in front of Ultron and just let Ultron go to town on him. And I dream of that somehow. All right, so Jan has been captured. She's being held in a tiny little container by, it's the Collector. Woo! So the Collector is going to have a long and storied history with the Avengers starting here. This is his first appearance, by the way, in Avengers 28. It's his first full appearance. So I take that, I guess they mean that maybe we've seen him before somewhere. In fact, if you look at the Collector's legs and boots and cape, and then compare that to the Beetle, I get the sense that maybe Avengers 26 was the first appearance of the Collector, but just not a full appearance. In other words, I was thinking until this moment that was the Beetle's legs that we saw. But actually, I did notice it looked like he was wearing a cape, and the Beetle doesn't wear a cape. I thought maybe it was his wings, but they're not shaped the same way. I think that was the Collector when Hawkeye was in the chair trying to remember, the code and everything. I think that was the Collector in Avengers Mansion that was there, and the Beetle was with him. So the Collector wants the full set of Avengers. I mean, he says, now that I have the Wasp, I want the rest of the Avengers. I must have a complete set. And he sends the Beetle to go get them. And another thing I think is interesting here is when the Collector appears in 174 fighting Hawkeye, the weapons he uses that he's collected over the years tend to be like alien and pretty scary and formidable. But in this issue, the weapons the Collector uses are more fantasy based. They're more fairy tale based. You'll see what I mean. All right. So the Collector sends off the Beetle to round him up the Avengers. Pym arrives, and there's this whole thing where Captain America doesn't recognize Henry Pym, although wouldn't you think, I mean, he's not wearing a mask, but if he had just shown up, I mean, this begs the question, right? There he is with no mask on, and they don't recognize him. If he'd shown up with a Giant Man mask on, would they have just been like, Giant Man, woo, and just taken him in with no question? Because you see less of him here than you would then. Or, I mean, the other way around. You see less of him then than you do here. I don't get it. But anyway, and in fact, at first, Cap believes him, but then Hawkeye, being Hawkeye, how can you be so sure he's the real Giant Man, Winghead? What if he's a phony? So Cap's going to insist that he change size. And that's a pretty cool Spidey versus Daredevil picture there. And then they basically say, all right, you need to change sizes so we'll know it's you, Giant Man. And Pym is all like, I don't even like the name Giant Man that much. But he says, I have learned how to change sizes without taking a pill or whatever. And then Wanda reveals that just in case Giant Man ever came back, she's been hand sewing him a new costume. It's always the girl, right? It's the woman, but that's how they would think of it, the girl. And so she's made a new costume for Henry Pym, not knowing he's Henry Pym. And it's yellow and blue instead of red and blue. And he puts it on and says, you're a talented designer, young lady, but I wouldn't care if it fit like a tent right now. Oh, yeah, she used a stretchy material that he left behind, she says. So he goes up to full size, 25 feet. Now, as Goliath, and this is his first appearance as Goliath, though far from his last. And interestingly, by the way, later Hawkeye will assume the Goliath power and name, okay? But in his first appearance as Goliath, he announces a couple of things. One, he no longer needs, artificial chemicals to change size. He can do it by willpower. Two, he can only go up to 25 feet in height, and he can't go beyond that. Although that looks more than 25 feet, but okay. And then finally, once he gets that big, he has to stay that big for at least 15 minutes, right? After 15 minutes, he can shrink back down. That's going to be important. All right, they get another vehicle, and Pym is wondering why is Hawkeye so strangely silent. I'm like, Hank, just enjoy it. Just be thankful and enjoy a couple of panels without insults, stupid nicknames, criticism, dopey comments, doubt. So as soon as he grows, Quicksilver says, what do you say now, Hawkeye? Oh, because Hawkeye had said, it's not going to work. I bet $5 or something. It's not going to work. And it does. And he says, welcome to the Avengers, pal. All right. So they go to the place. This does explain why Hawkeye's in a bad mood, by the way, a lot. he's thinking to himself, I always hoped Methuselah would someday retire. And by that, he means Captain America. And again, you'll recall at this point, Cap's only 20 years out of time. So if Cap was 25 in real time, 20 to 25, he's now 40 to 45, something like that. But he didn't age, of course. So it's not like he's 150 or anything like it was today. So he was hoping that Captain America would retire because for whatever reason, Hawkeye is all obsessed with being the leader of the Avengers. And now he's like, well, now Pym shows up. So it's going to be even harder for me to become the leader. And this whole leader thing is another thing that pops up a few times and will ultimately lead him to becoming, no pun intended, will cause him to become the leader of the Thunderbolts. So eventually, with some of these same characters around him, Hawkeye will become a team leader, but it's not the Avengers he'll be the leader of, it's the Thunderbolts. And I love this, that he's running his mouth again, and Pym says, what's wrong, Hawkeye? What's your beef? Which is the question I've been asking for issue after issue. And Cap says, you'll get used to him, Hank. Every group has its little sunbeam. He's ours. And then Hawkeye starts some garbage again. Oh, yeah, let me tell you, Winghead. And Cap says, clam up. Pietro spotted something. Oh, gosh. All right, so let's see where we are now. This opening opens up, revealing a concealed entranceway. The Avengers head in, and the Collector hears an electronic alarm go off, and they get trapped in these little boxes, basically, and get gassed, and now they're all hanging up. Now, this was interesting. When I was reading this part, I was thinking, oh, maybe this is what Shooter was directly copying in 174, because again, it's been years since I read these. I don't remember. So I'm like, oh, so maybe Captain America, Goliath, Quicksilver, maybe they all get captured. And they say, I'm glad I told Hawkeye to wait outside. This has trap written all over it. And then Cap says it's up to Hawkeye now. So I'm like, oh, we're going to have Hawkeye come in and fight the Collector like he does in 174. Wow, Shooter just ripped off this thing completely. No, because in the very next panel, guess what? Hawkeye has been captured. He doesn't know where Giant Man is. Well, he has Giant Man. He just doesn't know it. He has Goliath. And the Collector says, alas, the one you call Hawkeye is now as helpless as you, for he is now receiving the same quantity of sleep gas as his 4 helpless allies. So, yeah, off panel, no less, Hawkeye gets captured by the Collector. But he didn't know that Goliath was Giant Man. He grows. He chases him. He gets hit by a catapult. He's using a fly. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I was going to say, I said before that he uses kind of like alien technology in the 1979 or whatever story, 78 story. But here he uses like fantasy stuff that he's collected. So he's got a piece of the flying carpet of Persia that his cape is made out of. He uses a catapult. That's fine. And then he's going to use something else here in a minute that you'll see. So now Goliath can't shrink back down. He's inside this building and he's too big to get around. So he's crawling around. He's complaining. It's like being trapped in a dollhouse. Can barely get through. The other Avengers leave him behind, and they run into the Beetle. We get Captain America versus the Beetle. That should be a pretty good fight, but honestly, Captain America should finish him off in like 3 minutes, I would think. So they fight. Hawkeye, Cap calls for Maneuver 9 fast, and Wanda doesn't know what Maneuver 9 is, but Hawkeye does. I give Hawkeye credit here. All right, I'm going to give him credit. He does Maneuver 9, which is shoot an arrow in the wall that Cap catches himself on. Although it seems like he's at this point so far down, I'm not quite sure what good. But anyway, so the Beetle pulls out pieces of wall and he's fighting, but Wanda zaps him with a hex. Captain America beats him up, but then he beats up Captain America. More fighting. Meanwhile, Goliath confronts the Collector. And Collector uses a gong on him and some kind of crystal balls, Tibetan monastery mystic rays to freeze him. And then my favorite one, the beans of Jack and the Beanstalk. He throws down Jack and the Beanstalk beans, and it summons two giants from the beanstalk. And they fight Goliath. I mean, I just don't even know what to think at that point. The Beetle says, "Here is Captain America. The other two are trapped behind a ton of rock." Collector says, "You fool, that won't stop them. Have you forgotten the hex power of the Scarlet Witch?" And even as the Collector bellows in mounting rage, "You should have escaped while it was while you had the chance. Now it's too late." And they're squaring off. And again, let me pause for one more ad thing here because we're seeing an ad in the comic. Live seahorses and darling pet monkey. The darling pet monkey, I think I've talked about this before, right? $18.95. I'm just astonished they're still selling it. They ship you a pet monkey in the mail. What must the inside of that box look like and smell like when the monkey arrives? A squirrel monkey. Almost human with its warm eyes. So ship something that's almost human to me in a box. They grow about 12 inches high, eat same food as you do, even likes lollipops, simple to take care of and train. Free cage, free leather collar and leash, free monkey toy, and instructions included, live delivery guaranteed. $18.95. From Miami Beach, Florida. Did anybody out there ever order a darling pet monkey for $18.95? And if so, did it arrive alive? And what must the postman have thought? I just can't imagine. This just blows my mind that they were selling live monkeys through the mail. I just can't. And it says shop by mail up at the top right there. I just can't fathom that. That to me is more fascinating than anything in this issue of Avengers. I hate to say it, but it's true. All right, back to the story. All right, so Goliath is fighting the two giants, and Goliath gets fed up, and Wanda causes this belt he's using to break, and Goliath knocks him down, grabs the Collector. "I'm through making speeches. I'll tell you this just once. Hand over the Wasp, and I mean now, or no power on earth will save you from me." Collector says, "Very well, you'll get your wish, but I promise you'll live to regret it." He brings out, I keep wanting to say Wanda because it's the Wasp. I think Wah. He brings out Jan. He puts her down. She cannot return to normal size imprisoned in the cylinder. So as long as I hold her thus, you must do as I say. Now march to the dungeon cells I prepared for you. The final victory is still mine. But Quicksilver quickly goes around, takes the little thing away from the Collector, knocks him down. The Wasp is safe. They close in on the Collector, and Wanda says, "He still looks strangely confident." "Indeed, I have reason to be, as soon as you shall soon learn. Beetle, stand at my side. With all of them around us, you don't have to tell me twice." So they use another artifact to travel in time to get away. So where in the world does the Collector and the Beetle, where do they disappear to? But they're gone off in time. Now they have Jan. She's so small, yet so courageous. I love that. And they zap the glass. They break her out. And she's not wearing a mask, which I first took to mean something about breathing. I'm still kind of hung up on the whole Attuma underwater thing. But no, they mean everybody knows her identity. And I'm assuming they knew who Hank and Jan were separately because they recognized them, right? And Pym says, I've revealed my true identity, Jan. You might as well do the same. Very well, Blue Eyes, I will. And so she finds out about his new name, Goliath, which she loves. She asks Pym to shrink back down to pucker up size. After all, I've missed you, dear. And he doesn't wait 15 minutes. It's the best offer I've had all day. And he shrinks down. I was too careless. I remained giant size too long. Now, wait a minute. Did he... You've been telling us for 2 issues now, Stan, that he has to wait 15 minutes and then it's okay for him to shrink down. Now you tell us he stayed large too long and the sudden strain of shrinking is too much. So he's still Giant Man. Well, he's Goliath now, but only up to 25 feet in height. He can't shrink back to normal in less than 15 minutes. And if he stays much beyond 15 minutes, he suffers. He gets stuck at 10 feet. And he says, I can't control it any longer. If I don't get my ability back, I'll remain this way, 10 feet tall forever. Forever. Oh. And Hawkeye, always helpful, says he's still breathing, but if he lost his power to change size, that means he'll remain 10 feet tall. He'll be a freak. And then Quicksilver says, I grieve for him. Oh, gosh. And Jan says, it's my fault. He did it to save me, and now look what I've done to him. Don't reproach yourself, Jan. He'd give his life 100 times to save yours, says Captain America. But can it be that another Avenger has left our ranks to return no more? Next issue, Power Man, the Swordsman, and the Black Widow. So in our next issue, we will find out, A, if Hank survives, presumably, because generally Stan doesn't leave these kind of things hanging over more than a couple of issues. There's not going to be like a year-long Hank trapped in suspended animation while they figure out how to, shrink him back to normal. Number 2, we'll also find out what's Eric Johnston Power Man been up to, the Swordsman, and the Black Widow. That's quite a collection of characters from just the last few issues, all kind of coming back together. 2 of whom will later be Avengers, Swordsman and Black Widow, and one of whom, Power Man, again, will later be a Thunderbolt under Hawkeye's leadership. Isn't that interesting? All right, let's see if there's anything else of note here. We're still selling the sweatshirt. There's, look, very first letter, Mrs. Douglas Court in Libby, Montana. So again, I'm just fascinated that there were quite a few women. That's awesome, reading the Avengers back then and writing letters. There's Ann Zimmerman in Dayton, Ohio, and it's Mrs. I mean, it's just interesting that it's like not young girls. You'd think that would be reading comics maybe, but grown married women. That's just cool. I'm just surprised is all. Maybe I'm crazy for being surprised. So, and she asked, do you have any members from Montana? I thought we were fast at latching onto worthwhile things, but I don't know now. Just want to add my voice. Others asking the Hulk be added to the Avengers. Oh my gosh. No, let's don't add the Hulk. And then the next one is a graduate student at University of Pittsburgh. So we've got college students. I mean, but the reason I'm touching on this is Marvel has always been talked about as, DC more catered to the kids and to people that like their comics more simplistic back then. Marvel was always the ones that would brag about college students read their comics, right? And everybody, people like that. Stan would go out and talk at different colleges, give presentations. So that's just interesting to me that you see that reflected in the letters page. And there's a letter from Alan Patterson in the United Kingdom, in Cardiff, Wales. So, yeah, after reading the letters section of Avengers number 20, I felt like I had to write you a letter. John McKinney is right. You do think all the English do is talk about cricket and drink tea. I feel very strongly about this. Over the years, the British have gotten a very bad reputation, which is not accurate. Just because Britain may at times be ruled by old-fashioned people who still think Queen Victoria is on the throne and that we still rule half of Africa, This image of the British people is wrong. Incidentally, I have been a fan of yours for many years. All right. And I love that the reply is, we can't figure out why some people claim we think the British do nothing but talk about cricket and drink tea. We've never voiced so foolish an opinion, nor have we ever consciously poked fun at any British characters in our scintillating sagas. We actually have the deepest affection, the greatest respect for our English cousins. In fact, nobody better say a word against the British to Smiling Stan, whose gorgeous wife was born in Newcastle on Tyne. One of my good friends is from Newcastle, in the northern part of Great Britain. So if we toss in an expression or two like sticky wicket, what? It's only because we love you, okay? That's really cool. All right. So that's going to wrap us up. Man, right over an hour. We got 3 whole issues in about an hour. So tune in next time for All of the Avengers, when we will see what's going on with Power Man, Swordsman, and Black Widow. 2 of whom have a connection to Hawkeye, by the way. Swordsman and Black Widow, right, from his immediate past, and that should be interesting, and find out how we can save the life of Henry Pym, Goliath. All right, go to www.avengersassemble.net, not .com, www.avengersassemble.net. Lots of cool stuff there, interviews, videos, features, and all of our previous episodes are there in a playlist, in a drop-down playlist. And then become a patron. All right, we'd appreciate it. We will see you guys down the road. Avengers Assemble.